Welcome back to another Nourish to Flourish episode with yours truly, Megan the Trainer, registered dietitian. And today I am coming at you for our Nourish to Flourish episode in February, which is American Heart Month. So obviously Valentine's Day falls in here. So it's a great way to show some love to your heart. So we're going to talk about a couple of things relating to sodium and blood pressure connecting to, again, heart health. So you probably have been familiar with, sodium and its connection that it's going to increase blood pressure, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how exactly that works, why that exactly is a connection, and then therefore what you can do about it or what you should do about it. So sodium is going to have a kind of a connection from a blood pressure perspective in kind of twofold ways. Now, here's the thing, though, too. There's a lot of other things that can influence blood pressure, like stress, smoking, activity, all of those things. There's a bunch of other stuff involved, too, but we're just going to zoom specifically into sodium. So when it comes to sodium, this has, as I mentioned, kind of a twofold impact. Side number one is that sodium is going to cause fluid retention. So, if you've ever had a lot of salty things, maybe you feel a little bloated or a little puffy afterwards. Usually wherever salt goes, wherever sodium goes, water is going to follow. So if we have maybe a meal or a snack or a day where we have a lot of saltier foods and things, we can kind of notice a difference in our body, especially in our water weight. With that increase in, again, water retention, fluid volume, it also is going to increase the volume in our blood because our body likes to keep things like our electrolytes, sodium is one of them, at a very certain concentration. So if we have more sodium coming in from our food, we're going to need to dilute it out a little bit. So we're going to hold on to more water. So there are some different reactions and things that take place that your body will tell your kidneys to not excrete as much. So we're going to hold on to some more water so that we can dilute out some of that sodium. Now, if you imagine that all of your blood vessels are kind of like garden hoses, what happens if we try to jam more water into them? That's going to increase the pressure on the vessel, right? Which therefore is going to increase our blood pressure. And then from a second side of things, so over time, if we are having chronically high levels of sodium coming into our diet, this can also lead to kind of a stiffening of the arteries, kind of like atherosclerosis in a sense, or where it causes our blood vessels just to kind of constrict, so they're vasoconstrictors. So this sometimes, again, this is where a lot of the rationale of reducing sodium, reducing salt from your diet can assist with blood pressure. Now, I also want to add a caveat is that there are also people in our population that are not quite as salt sensitive as others. So adjusting sodium might not necessarily make a difference. So if you're maybe one of those people who has tried that and haven't noticed a difference in your blood pressure, maybe that you fall into that kind of category. But here's some of the things that you can do about this. So obviously, as I just mentioned, we can pull back on sodium. Again, this might work for some, this might not work for others. We can also be mindful about increasing more potassium. Sometimes it's not necessarily just a sodium problem, but just a sodium imbalance with other electrolytes like potassium. So bananas, potatoes, those would be, kind of things that you can include. Of course, those are kind of the poster childs for high potassium foods. But that can kind of help counteract some of those things. And then the other thing when it comes to reducing sodium intake, it's not just the salt shaker. I think everybody thinks that. Or maybe if a food tastes too salty, it's because, we were overzealous in seasoning. Sodium is kind of sneaky, and we don't really realize that it's in a lot of the foods that we eat. So some of the high level of sodium foods that I want you to kind of be aware of is some of them might, not surprise you, but some of them also might. Things like deli meats or processed meats like hot dogs and bacon and sausage, these will typically have a lot more salt added to them, especially from a preservative and a flavoring standpoint. But things like pizza, because there'll be some sodium in the crust, there'll be some in the sauce, and there's probably going to be some sodium in the cheese. I was just talking with a client about this over the weekend in that something that kind of surprised them was the sodium content in things like cottage cheese, for example, which you might think might be a really great protein source, which you're right, but at the same time, depending on the situation, it might be a little high in sodium too. So different cheeses sometimes can be a little bit higher as well. So soups and some processed vegetables or canned things, will usually have some extra sodium in there as well, again, from a flavor perspective, from a preservative perspective. So of course we can find lower sodium options of this, but again, it's more than just what's going on with the salt shaker. It's also coming down to, again, just decreasing processed foods in general. So now that you know better, let's go ahead and do better so we can all be better and love your heart.